right. Hey, everybody. My name's Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thank you so much for joining me today for Basic Computing. I'm glad to have you here. Before we dive in, a couple of quick preliminary things to get out of the way here. First of all, of course, we've got a lot of stuff coming up, as always, here at CALS. We've got coming up tomorrow night an issues that matter discussion. We're doing those along with KUAR and the League of Women Voters. They're are very interesting panel discussions with a lot of figures that have a lot of interesting things to say about political issues and kind of particularly things that are going on here locally in Central Arkansas. This time they're going to be talking about housing and homelessness. So please tune in for that, and it'll be great tomorrow night, 6:30. We've also got a bunch of other stuff going on. If you head to cals.org, move your mouse over events and click on find an event online, then that should get you there. The other big thing that I always like to say at the beginning of class is if you have questions at any point, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about whether it might seem like a silly question or those sorts of things. I'm not at all worried about that. Excuse me. My main concern is I want to make sure that if you have questions, they get answered. And so that's more important than, making sure I cover every point in my outline or those types of things. So definitely speak up if you have questions. Let me know what's going on. That way I can make sure that that your questions get addressed and that you're able to follow along with what's going on. So one thing let's see. One additional thing, okay. If you have questions, how do you let me know? Well, if you're joining me on Zoom, what you'll want to do is head down to the bottom, click on the little speech bubble at the bottom that says chat, and you should have the little chat window that pops out on the side. Type your question in there, press enter on your keyboard, and you should be good to go. If you are joining me on Zoom or in Zoom on a mobile device, tap the middle of the screen, tap the more button in the corner, tap on chat, and then you'll be able to type in your question there. If you are joining me via a live stream, what you'll want to do is you'll want to on Facebook, go down and use the chat, or use the comments, just like you would on any other, on any other post in all of Facebook. And then you'll also want to, you'll also want to make sure that, if you're joining me via YouTube, what you'll want to do is just use the live chat feature. That's out to the side or down below, depending on what device you're using and how you have things set up. So, and of course, if there are technical issues at any point, please let me know about that, because that can definitely make things challenging, and I want to make sure that that we get those addressed quickly, so that way they're not interfering with our class and taking up your time. So let's go ahead and get to it. I'm going to go ahead so we're going to talk about a few different things. The idea behind this class, Basic Computing, is that, when I first started teaching technology classes, I had a very introductory level class, Introduction to Computers, that I offered. but because of the very basic level of that class, it didn't apply to as many folks as it might have several years back. Most people at this point, if they've most people have used a computer at some point for some reason. And a lot of folks know things like how to move the mouse, what the keyboard does, how to click something, or how to even how to open up their email a lot of times. And so I still occasionally do the intro to computers class, but typically what I'm going to do I offer this class more often because I find there are folks who have used the computer from time to time. They know a little bit about it. Maybe they had to use a computer for work, but they're not necessarily using they're not necessarily using them all the time, and they don't necessarily feel terribly confident about it. And so that's what this class is about, basically instilling a little of that confidence so that you can improve your computer skills without and be able to sort of more easily work with the computer. So we're going to cover a few different topics here. The main things that we're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to talk about the different connectors that are associated with a computer. There are a lot of different types of connectors that you might run across, and you want to make sure. And so knowing some of that can kind of help make things a little bit simpler when you're trying to when you're working with a computer, or when you encounter a computer, or particularly if, say, I don't know, you need to move your computer from one place to another, or things like that. So in all of those types of situations, you want to make sure that it helps to know a little bit about it. Now, if you head to the web address that I had up on the screen there a few moments ago, that which is, let me go ahead and drop it in the chat and the comments and so forth. Give me just a moment here. So it's cals.live/basic files. Here we go. Got it. And there we go. Okay, cool. So if you head to that, you'll be able to download the example files that we're going to be working with a little later, so you can play around with those. And you'll also be able to download the handout. The handout is it's just going to allow you to really easily it's just going to give you a little cheat sheet for some of this stuff that we're going to be talking about. So feel free to download that, to print it out if you want, and it'll be good to have that handy. So let's see here. All right. Making sure everything's set. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's go ahead and dive in. So I am going to fire up the screen sharing and go from there. All right, excellent. Okay, cool. So we've got our slideshow here here in front of us now. And basically, when you use this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the connectors that are on the back of a computer that's in that's in the technology classrooms where I teach classes when in-person classes are going on. So you can use that to, you can kind of use that as a reference to sort of see what these connectors look like, and we'll talk about what they do and how things are plugged into them, and so on and so forth. So, okay, so let's go ahead and dive into that. So here's the computer, one of the computers in that technology classroom. And we're just going to go bit by bit and talk about these connectors. That may look like a lot, but do not worry. We will definitely make sure that you know what each of these does, or at least you've heard it. You don't have to remember it. That's why the handout exists. But this will help you know if you run into it. It's not scary. They all do something. They all do something useful, and so it'll be easy to, so you can think, oh yeah, I've seen that before. That's not so bad. And honestly, that's one of the things that is that's most difficult sometimes when you're new to using technology, is just that feeling of this is not very familiar, and feeling afraid you're going to break something. That's one of the biggest things that I say to folks is when you're working with technology, you want to make sure that you have the best way to learn about technology a lot of times is to experiment with it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I just want to plant that seed a little bit. Let's go ahead and dive into this. Okay. The first connector we're going to talk about is super duper easy. It's the power socket. This is a desktop computer. So the power socket on a desktop computer is usually going to look something like this. It may be slightly different, but typically for a desktop computer like this, where we have the this box here called the CPU, which is kind of the brain of the computer. And then separately, you have the monitor where you can see what's going on with the computer visually. In those types of situations with those sorts of desktop computers, you're pretty much always going to have a power socket there. And so with the power socket, what you can do is you can plug in a cable that'll look something like this. It'll match up with the socket itself. And of course, you plug the other end into a standard outlet. And so that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, your computer won't work without power. So that's you're probably going to need that. With a laptop, it's slightly different. Usually you'll have a cable that has what's called an AC adapter on it. So typically it's going to be something like this. So this end goes out to and plugs into a regular power socket, just like this. Then you have a little box here. That's the AC adapter, and it basically converts the power that's coming out of your wall or your power strip or whatever into power that the laptop can use. And then on the other end, you have what they call a barrel connector, one of these kind of roundish ones that has a little hole in the middle. Basically, your desktop computer is going to use, rather than having that little box on the cable, usually it's going to have the AC adapter inside the computer in a thing called the power supply. But it works pretty much the same way, though of course your desktop computer won't have a battery or be able to travel without being unplugged and still stay on. Okay, so that's the power socket. We also have audio jacks here. Audio jacks are pretty straightforward. This particular computer has two audio jacks, and one of them is kind of a multi-function one. So this one here, it's hard to tell because of the color of the photo, but this one here is green, and it's very light green. What this does is this is an audio output. So it has the symbol is slightly different, but usually it's going to have a symbol that's very similar to this. You'll have this kind of wavy sound wave pattern, and then you'll have an arrow that points out to show that the audio is going out of your computer into your speaker or your speakers or your headphones or whatever. So that's an output. Obviously, you would plug a headphone jack type plug, something like this, into that port, something like that. You'll also have, and then this one is kind of a multifunction input one. There are two different types of audio input that this particular jack can accept, and sometimes these will be separate jacks on a computer. So up here on the top is a microphone jack. Obviously, for things like Zoom, you may need a microphone, and you can plug one in to this microphone jack right here. The other option that you have is what's called line in. So that's this symbol here, so it's an arrow pointing into the middle of the sound waves rather than pointing out of them. What that's going to do is it's going to, so a line in jack accepts sound from other types of audio devices that are putting out essentially a full strength audio signal. If you were to somehow plug a microphone directly into your headphones, that's not going to work because there's nothing driving the headphones or amplifying the signal from the microphone. The microphone picks up on the little vibrations in the air that create sound, and it uses electricity from the computer to convert those into sound waves, or into a sound signal that your computer can interpret, right? But it's a very quiet signal on its own. And so a microphone jack amplifies that audio signal that's coming in from your microphone. A line in jack takes in audio from a piece of equipment that's already sending out an amplified signal, like, say, for instance, say your phone or an MP3 player, or even like a CD or record player, those sorts of things. It could take in a signal from any of those things and at what's called line level. In other words, a louder audio signal. So in this case, if you plug something into this jack, you're going to get a little pop-up box on the screen of your computer that says, what kind of device did you plug in? And you have to select it. Some computers will have a separate, they'll have three, your output, your microphone, and then your line in separate. So it just depends on your computer. You'll see all of those different symbols depending on what you've got. You might also see something like this, which is more of a combination jack. Usually on laptops, you'll have a jack that can accommodate headphones, headphones and a microphone simultaneously. So you can plug in a kind of a headset, something like this, that has both the headphones and a microphone attached to it in one jack. Or you can plug in any one of the other things, a microphone, a set of headphones, or another audio device. Okay, next up, we've got what's called an Ethernet port. The Ethernet port is basically your internet jack, for all practical purposes. The Ethernet port, if you have a home internet connection, or you are at work and there's a local computer network at your work, you'll usually use an Ethernet port to plug in to the back of, say, the box that you got from AT&T or Comcast or whoever. or into the wall in the case of a work network a lot of the time. But basically, this is what this Ethernet port does is it allows you to use an Ethernet cable, which looks like this, to connect to a computer network. In other words, a set of computers that are connected together so they can talk to each other. Of course, the biggest, most popular, most important computer network is the internet. And so most of the time, that's really what you're doing primarily when you plug this in is getting access to the internet. However, we have a network here at the library, and if we are and we can send certain types of information back and forth between computers here in the building and that sort of thing. So so that's the Ethernet port. It's primarily how you plug in the internet. I will say, of course, a lot of computers just use Wi-Fi to get a wireless connection to the internet. And Wi-Fi are really, really useful because you don't have to worry about plugging in, plugging your computer in and making sure your cable's long enough and making sure you're right next to wherever the signal is coming from. But it can be a little bit less reliable than a wired connection. And so, so depending on your situation, you may prefer to use an Ethernet cable. Okay, let's look at the next one here. The next one is USB ports. USB stands for Universal Serial Bus, and I promise you do not have to remember that. There will not be a test, and probably no one will ever say those words to you, Universal Serial Bus, ever again, now that I'm done saying it. The main part that I want to emphasize about USB is the U stands for universal, because you can plug darn near anything into a USB port. There are, well, I'm not going to count them. Many, many USB devices just here on my desk. You can plug in, a microphone. You can plug in that headset I just showed you. You can plug in your mouse and keyboard, of course. You can plug in a camera. You can plug in your phone and transfer information back and forth between your phone and your computer, including photos. And just tons of other things. Of course, we use USB to send information back and forth between devices. We also use USB to charge things. So if you have a smartphone, you use USB. You use a USB charger to charge your device, and so so it can be a whole lot of different stuff. You can use it for a lot of different things. Let me show you a couple of interesting things about this. So the setup on the back of these computers, we've got these 4 ports with kind of black interiors there. And then these little parts in the middle of these 2 are blue. And you'll also notice that the symbol next to them looks slightly different. This is sort of the standard USB symbol. I'm not going to go into why that's the symbol, but it's pretty fitting. Next to that is on these is a little plus sign. That tells me that when I plug a device in here, it'll be able to draw a little bit of extra power. So if it's a device that needs a little bit of extra power, then it will be able to provide that. And then over here is one that has SS next to it. Now, this is a little bit silly, but the SS there stands for super speed. And yeah, that's really what it stands for. But if you see this or you see the blue plastic inside of the port, you can then you'll know that this type of port can send and receive information a lot faster than kind of your standard ports like these. So Some computers nowadays are coming with only these ports. Some computers have like a few of these ports and then a lot more of these ports, and some have the reverse. But if you have a device where you need it to be able to transfer quickly, like, well, a classic example would be a USB flash drive. You just pop it in and you can transfer files back and forth, and you can keep the flash drive with you in case you need those files on another computer as you're, going about your day or whatever. So with a flash drive, you want to be able to transfer files back and forth fairly quickly. And so that really, if I plug it into one of these super speed ports, rather than just the standard ports over here, then I'm going to be able to transfer those files back and forth a lot faster and get back to whatever it was I was doing. And you'll notice inside, if I hold this up a little closer to the camera, you'll notice inside this, it's also blue. So that indicates that this is a device that's compatible with these kinds of ports. Now, if I were to plug it into one of these ports, it will still work. It'll just be slower. And if you have a device that's compatible with that's only really compatible with these ports, and you plug it into one of these, it's going to be perfectly fine. That device is going to run as fast as it can. But if you have something like that where you need to send and receive a lot of information fairly quickly, look for this little super speed symbol over here, and that'll be a better way to go. So let me show you another thing here. Let me get this pulled up. Okay, I'm going to switch my screen sharing for just a moment. Okay, so this is a USB-C cable. It looks slightly different from the other cables that you were seeing on the previous screen, or from the port or from the plug that's on my flash drive that I just showed you. It's kind of more rounded, you'll notice, and kind of a pill shape almost. And it plugs into a kind of rounded, sort of pill-shaped USB-C port. Let me show you. Okay. There we go. All right, I'm going to switch over to that, and there we go. Okay, this port right here is the USB-C port. And you'll notice it has a couple of symbols by it. It does still have that super speed symbol. And it also has this little D for display port, which we'll talk about in a second, because this kind of port can put out a bunch of different types of signals, including a signal for your monitor and things like that. So USB-C is getting more and more common. It's super duper useful. And again, you'll need a USB-C cable or adapter in order to plug into one of these. But you can, once you've got the adapter in place, you can then plug in a lot of sort of regular USB devices to one of those adapters. So if you have a bunch of those on your device rather than the rectangular ones like we see in the slideshow here, then that's okay. You can still use devices that plug into these. You'll just need a little adapter for it. Last but not least, let's talk about monitor ports. So this computer has two of the common monitor ports, and there's a third one that I also want to point out here in a second as well. So the two that this has on it, the first one is called VGA. I don't remember what VGA stands for because it's not important. But basically, this type of connector has been in use for a very long time, at least probably I don't know, I would say a good 20 or 30 years, this type of port has been in use. And so it's on lots and lots and lots and lots of devices, including projectors in meeting rooms and old computers and some new computers and a lot of monitors and some TVs and a bunch of other stuff. Um, so if you have a computer that has this port on it and you have a monitor or a TV that has this port on it, then you can use those two things together. And that's really, really handy. But obviously, as I said, this has been in use for a long time, and it's kind of it's kind of an older standard. And so one of the things about it is, there are improved monitor ports that a lot of newer devices use. One of those is the display port. It's got this little kind of looks, well, it's a D and a P, so display port, right? And it's kind of rectangular, almost looks like the USB ports that we just looked at, except it is a little bit wider, and it has a little hole cut out of the corner here. And when you plug that in, one of the nice things about it versus the VGA is that it also transmits audio information. So in addition to just a picture that it's sending to your monitor, it's also transmitting sound. And that's really useful because obviously, if you have a monitor that has speakers built into it, or if you're plugging it into a TV or something, then you can use one cable to transmit the picture and sound rather than two. You can also use this, the other big thing about this DisplayPort connector is that it's digital, whereas this one's analog. So we don't have to get too deep into the weeds with that. But the reason that that's helpful is you can think of an analog signal as waves, or as sort of taking, if you had a volume knob on your stereo, taking that volume knob and sort of turning it up and down, almost like if you were to send Morse code by turning the volume up and down on your stereo over and over again. That's kind of what an analog signal is like. The signal is there's more of a signal or less of a signal, and how much signal there is exactly tells the computer, okay, I need to put this color on the screen, and so on and so forth. So it builds a picture of whatever is supposed to show up on your monitor that way. But that's imprecise because the whole time you're sort of turning it down and turning it up, and there's that transition of like where you're in the middle of turning it up or turning it down. And so if the timing's not exactly right, then it doesn't give you a clear, exact picture. The DisplayPort signal is more like if you were turning a light, if you were turning a flashlight on and off to transmit Morse code. It only really has two settings, on and off. And so right away, is it on or is it off? And you can decode that very easily. Well, if you know Morse code, to be honest, I don't really, but someone who knew Morse code would be able to translate it really easily, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I say this puts out a digital signal. And what that does is allow the computer to be more precise about what information is supposed to appear on our screens. And it also allows a lot more information to be transmitted faster, because you don't have to worry about that sort of whoop, whoop transition. It's just on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. That's what I mean when I say it's a digital signal. That allows it to do a lot more. Transmit audio as well as video, transmit a lot more, or transmit a lot more information, so you get a more detailed picture, and to be more precise so that your picture looks a little sharper and less fuzzy. So that's DisplayPort. Another kind of similar thing to DisplayPort is HDMI. This computer doesn't have an HDMI port on the back, but if it did, you would take a cable like this to plug in. It basically looks a lot like the DisplayPort connector, except it's cut out on two sides in two corners rather than just one. And HDMI is very, very common if you have a computer or if you have a TV that was made after, I'm going to say 2006 or so at the latest, then it probably has at least one HDMI port and hopefully more. And that's primarily what it's used for, is home theater type stuff. So plugging your DVD or Blu-ray player into your TV, plugging in, video game consoles to your TV, plugging in the sound system to your TV, and so on and so forth. So that's what HDMI is primarily for. But because it's such a common thing to find, a lot of computers have HDMI ports as well. And that's pretty handy, because if you have, say, a laptop with an HDMI port, then anywhere there's a TV, you can plug it into you can plug the laptop into the TV and get more of a big screen type experience. So, and it's a very similar type of thing. It transmits both the sound and the picture. It does it digital rather than analog, like we just talked about. And so that is, that can be really, so HDMI is also very, very useful. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much it for talking about computer connectors. Like I said, you don't have to remember all this stuff. It's there's not going to be a test, and really what this is about is just getting you a little more comfortable with knowing what these connectors are and what they do. So that way you can sort of, it's easier for you to, look at a computer and go, oh yeah, that looks familiar, rather than go, oh, there's so many plugs, what do I do with this? And get overwhelmed. It's not quite as overwhelming if you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. So that's the idea behind going through this stuff. And of course, as I said, you can download the handout as a little cheat sheet by just heading again to that address. Let me hop on back there. cals.live/basic files. All right. So what questions do y'all have for me about that stuff before we dive into, shift gears a little bit? All right. I don't see anything just yet. If you do have questions, again, if you're here in Zoom, drop them in the chat for me at any point. If you are watching through the live stream, then let me know in the comments or in the live chat, and I will be able to tackle those. All right. Let me go ahead and turn and stop this screen share and switch things over to the demo computer that we're going to use. And then we will, we'll go from there. So let's see here. All right, excellent. There we go. Okay, so here we are on the example computer that I'm going to be working with you on throughout the rest of the class. It's interesting. Okay, well, weird. What we're going to do here is, as I said, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about how to how to manage files on our computer and kind of where things are stored and stuff like that. And that hopefully will be really useful. We'll also talk about some other very handy things like copy and paste along the way. But a lot of times folks are a little bit baffled by how things are set up on their computer. And, if they save some information, then it just kind of goes into a mysterious void and they're not 100% sure what's going on there. So basically, that's what we want to avoid by learning a little bit more about how your computer stores information. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the bottom of my screen, and let's talk about all of this stuff that's here first. So here in front of me, of course, I've got this nice little nature scene, and with the rocks and the trees and the water and so forth. This is what's called the desktop of our computer. So the desktop is kind of the home screen. If you're, if you think about it in terms of what you might have on a phone, it's where you start out essentially. And then down here at and we've got a bunch of icons here. We'll talk about those in a second, but I just want to point out that they are there. They do exist. And then down here at the bottom of the screen, we've got a lot of other stuff. For one thing, we've got what's called the Start button here. This is Windows 10, by the way, and most folks using a Windows computer at this point should have Windows 10 set up, unless it's just not compatible with their computer. And I'd be very careful about using a computer that's not compatible with Windows 10 because most of the other versions of Windows are pretty far out of date at this point, and so security is a bit of a concern right now. But down here at the bottom, you should see the start button right here. I'm going to click on that, and when I do, it'll show me things that are installed on this computer, and I can click on the name of a program, like say the calculator, and it'll open the program right up for me, just like that. Pretty easy. So, so we've got our, the start menu is just where we find all the various programs that are installed on our computer that we can use. Over here where it says type to search, you can, type there to search. So you click there and then you search for, say, if I were looking for this sound this song that's on the desktop of my computer here, then I'll start typing the name and it comes up here. I could press enter or I could click on it to open it right up and start playing the song. Next to that is, on some devices at least, would be what's called the Cortana button, this little circle here. You can click on that to talk to Microsoft's Cortana voice assistant and tell it things like to set a timer, stuff like that. Next to that is the task view or timeline button. If you click on that, you're going to see any programs that are open on your computer and be able to switch between them. But I'm just going to hit escape to get out of there. You've got your, and then you've got a bunch of icons here, or you may only have a couple depending on the situation. The main one so you can put other icons here that could be useful to you, programs that you use fairly regularly. But we're going to come back to this one here in a moment, the File Explorer icon, because we're going to spend a little bit of time in there. Down on the other side here, on this particular laptop, there's a little charging indicator here on the taskbar. That may or may not show up on yours, but that's what we have on this one. And there's a little news and weather situation here. If you move your mouse over it, you can see, you can check the news, check the weather, and then down here are some other stuff like you have your time and date. You have the notifications button here. If you click on this, it's going to slide out this whole thing that'll show you different little messages from the programs installed on your computer. You can click on these to deal with them and so on. And you can change settings for your computer down here. If you don't see all of these buttons and you want to see more of them, there's expand and collapse right there. You also have, no, I still need it to, oh, right. Okay, we're good. You also have down here little icons. For instance, you can click this, you can click on the little speaker right here to open up your, or to change your volume. So you click on this, slide this back and forth, and that'll change your volume. You can see whether you're connected to the internet or to Wi-Fi. You can see the status of your battery and a bunch of other stuff. And there are even more icons if you click this up arrow right here. Okay, so so we've got that. Let me poke around in, well, let me pop back over here to the File Explorer. If I click on this little folder icon, so it's a manila folder with this little, in this little blue, I don't know, folder holder? I'm not sure. So if you click on that, then what it's going to do is come up and show you some of the stuff that's stored on your computer. When you first open it up, it takes you to what's called quick access right here. Excuse me. And this quick access area is basically going to show you things that you might need to get to fairly easily, little shortcuts to them. For example, folders up here that you use frequently or that you've used recently. And then down here, recent files. Usually it'll show you, depending on how long it's been or depending on what things you've been doing on your computer, usually it'll show you, excuse me, up to 20 of the most recent files that you've downloaded to this computer. So, we have, I can look through and I could double click on any of these files to get right back into working with them, basically. Over here on the left-hand side, we've got a bunch of other stuff. So I have other shortcuts to frequently used or, folders that I need quick access to on the left. And then in addition to that, I've got some stuff, Microsoft OneDrive, where you can store, essentially store information, different files from your computer online. This PC right here, and then network to show me other devices that are connected to my, to the network that my computer is connected to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and click on this PC. And when I do that, I get this situation here. Again, I've got some shortcuts to folders. And then I have where it says devices and drives. And then mine says 1 in parentheses here. And what this is my computer's internal, its main internal storage. So your computer has two different pieces of information or two different ways that it can store information. And you can think of this kind of like we as people think of our memory. So if you think about about your own memory, you have short-term memories and long-term memories, right? So if I need a phone number and I go and look it up, and then I'm walking across the room to get to my phone and dial the phone number, then the whole time in my head, I'm like trying to remember that, I'm trying to remember the phone number that I looked up, 867-5309, 867-5309. And then when I get to the other side and I've dialed it into the phone, my brain basically forgets it right away. I could still tell you what the name of my second grade teacher was. So there are some things that I remember long-term, and there are some things that I don't remember long term that basically I know I can forget, and so I do forget them. And your computer works the same way. Your computer's short-term memory is called RAM. That stands for random access memory. And basically, that's where your computer stores the stuff that it's working with right now. For example, programs that you currently are using, or things that are running in the background, or a document that you've just started writing that you haven't saved yet. Those sorts of things. And when you turn your computer off, the RAM gets cleared out, and you no longer and nothing's stored there. On the other hand, you have your computer's long-term memory, and that's what's commonly known as the hard drive. In this case, I'm just going to call it the hard drive from here on out, but what I technically have is something called a solid state drive, or SSD, which is a little bit different, but it basically does the same thing. It's a little bit faster than a regular hard drive. A regular hard drive is a big old stack of, it's pretty small actually. It's a stack of magnetic disks that spin really fast, and information is stored on them magnetically, kind of like the magnetic strip on the back of your credit card, but in overdrive, basically. So you can use, so your computer stores that information magnetically, and then whenever you need it, it goes back, it spins around until it finds the information that it needs, and then it brings it back to you. And all that happens super duper quickly. It's pretty cool. And that's where your computer stores its long-term memories, I guess. That's the actual storage space on your computer. So when I double click on my hard drive here, and by the way, usually it'll say C : next to it. That's kind of a holdover from some old school computer stuff that we don't necessarily need to get into. But when someone talks about the C drive, that's what they're talking about, the main storage area of your computer, the main storage device, like your hard drive. So I'm going to double click on that, and it's going to show me a big old list of a bunch of folders and also little files here. So the folders are this is how the information is stored on my computer. There are a few files that are just kind of out there, just on the hard drive itself, without being in any particular folder. But most of the stuff that's stored in your computer is stored in one of these folders. For example, I'll double click on the users folder here. What that does is it gives me a list of user accounts that have logged onto this computer. So this one is the one that I typically use. It's based on an old email address. It's weird, but anyway, don't worry about it. This one is kind of a shared profile. So basically, you can keep your stuff separate if you have a shared computer, like sitting in the middle, sitting in your living room or something like that. You can have a folder, and your spouse can have a folder, and your kids can have a folder, and so on. And that way, everybody has their own separate stuff, and it's easier for folks to configure the computer the way they want and work with it. So I'm going to double click on my user folder. When I do, I get, okay, inside my user folder, there's 3D objects, contacts, desktop, documents, downloads, favorites, links, music, pictures, so on and so forth. A lot of stuff here. And so I could keep my own collection of pictures that I've taken on my phone in the pictures folder. I can keep a music collection in this music folder, and so on and so forth. And again, those will be separate from other users on the computer. So that way we don't get our stuff all mixed up. The documents folder, of course, I could store information in there that I need. Downloads is stuff that I've got copies of from the internet. And then there's the desktop here. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to double click on the desktop to open it up. You'll notice on the desktop, if you look at this, there's not complete overlap, but you'll notice a lot of the things that are showing up here are also showing up here on the computer's desktop area. Excuse me. And if you put something here, if you were to put a file there, then it would show up. It would show up in this list. That's really handy sometimes because sometimes you need to be able to get to something really, really quickly. And so putting it on your desktop makes it so that as soon as you log on to your computer, bam, it's right there. You just double click on it and open it up, and there it is. So there are 3 different types of things that are happening here. So this one says Spices by Curtis Cole artlist.wave. And this is like a music file. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then it's going to start playing the music. Cool. So this is just a file. It's a piece of information that's stored here on the desktop of the computer so that I can get to it easily. I also have this right here, which is a shortcut to a program. In this case, Microsoft Edge, the web browser that comes with Windows. When I double click it, it opens up and I can surf the web in various ways. For instance, I can head to the library's website. There we go. Great. All right. So, so that's a program shortcut. I can open that up and get to a program. And then there are also folders. So this is a folder that says Mouse Without Borders. That's a program that I use to control multiple computers, with the same mouse and keyboard. And you can also transfer files back and forth, as I did here. So I dropped so there are a bunch of files inside this folder. And whoops. Okay, I didn't really mean to close that File Explorer window. So let me open that back up really quick. There we go. Great. Okay, so now that that's done, I can, excuse me. So basically you can have, you'll really usually have 3 different types of things on your desktop: files, program shortcuts, and folders that have other files or programs or whatever inside of them. This other file here is basiccomputing.zip, and this is a version of the example files that you can download for the class, again, from cals.live/basic files. I'm going to double click on this to open it up. Inside, there's actually another folder called Basic Computing, which is kind of annoying. But what can you do? I'm going to click on Compressed Folder Tools up here and click Extract All. So if you've downloaded the example files, this is how you would do it. And because there's a separate Basic Computing folder inside of the folder I was just looking at, I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm just going to put the whole thing in the desktop. I'll click Extract. There we go. And now I have a folder called Basic Computing right there. Cool. So inside of that folder, I've got a bunch of different types of things, and I've got them. I'm seeing them this way, but I actually want to change the view here a little bit. So I'm going to click with the right mouse button, or if you're on a laptop, you can tap with 2 fingers on the laptop's touchpad usually. And I'm going to go to large icons. That's going to make it a little easier for us to see what's going on there, and just a little more interesting. Okay, so inside of my basic computing folder, I've got all these different oh, I see. Okay. So inside of my basic computing folder, I've got all these other files. Now it's worth mentioning kind of where we've been so far. So over here, I'm going to click this little arrow next to where it says this PC. I'm going to click the arrow next to my C drive right here. I'll click the arrow next to users, my user folder, desktop, and finally basic computing. So if you look at this, the way that you can, one way I like to think about this is kind of like an address. So when so if you were to come to my house, then, I would give you the address, and you could get there pretty easily, right? Well, with GPS or whatever, but basically, but having the address of but if you think about, for instance, someone trying to deliver a letter to me, they don't know where I am. They're not, maybe they're not going to use GPS to get there, or maybe they don't know where I am. If they look at my address in full, then they would get some clues as to how to get to my house. So, for example, it will, they're probably going to assume that I'm here in the United States because it'll say like Little Rock, Arkansas on the address. And if you think about it, you could say three basic things there right away. You could say that I live in the United States. You could also say that I live in Arkansas, and you could also say that I live in Little Rock, right? All those things are true. But there are plenty of people who live in the United States who don't live in Little Rock. No one who lives in Little Rock doesn't live in the United States, though. These with files and folders on a computer, it's kind of a similar setup. Basically, you have this hierarchy. So you have folders inside of folders inside of folders that are all on the hard drive. So when you look at these files, really what we've got here is so these files are inside the basic computing folder, which is inside of the desktop folder, which it says this PC. This is kind of another way that you can get there, but really the desktop folder is inside of my user account folder, which is inside the users folder, which is on my computer's C drive, which is inside my computer. So that's kind of the hierarchy that you have there. And every piece of information, every program, every file, every folder that's stored on your computer has what we call a path, its address. And it basically says, okay, look on this drive and look inside this folder, and then look inside this folder, and then look inside this folder, and then there it is. And that's the name of it. So that's how all the stuff is stored on your computer. And the reason for that is having it in a giant pile would be inefficient and confusing, both for you and the computer. If it's all in one folder, then it's going to take the computer a long time to find exactly what it's looking for. And it's going to take you a long time to find what you're looking for. However, if you have only documents inside the documents folder, then it's going to be relatively easy to find the document that you need because okay, I've been storing my documents in the documents folder, and that's good. You can store pretty much any file, pretty much anywhere. Excuse me. But it also does pay to keep it somewhat organized. So just FYI, I guess. Cool. So let's talk about some basic file types and what they are. We'll just go kind of alphabetically here. The first one I see on the left here is this one called cinematic-chillhop-main-6676.mp3. This is a free royalty-free music file that I downloaded from a stock photo service, actually. And what is, well, it's a song, kind of a little bit of background music, more or less. The reason that I know that it's audio information, besides the fact that I put the file there in the first place, but if I looked at it at a glance, I could still tell. And the reason for that is the end of the name of the file there. It says .mp3. This is what we call a file extension or file name extension. Your computer may be set to hide those. If you are, you can come up here, click on View, and check this box that says file name extensions, so that way you'll see it. If your computer is set to hide them, then usually what will happen is it will hide them unless it doesn't have a program, unless there's no program installed on the computer that can handle that type of file, in which case it will show it, just so that you don't get confused. This one right here, so the fact that it says .mp3, the MP part stands for MPEG, and that stands for something else that I don't remember. So it's not really worth getting into. But MP3 files are audio information, so they could be a song, they could be a whole album of songs, they could be a recorded audio program like a podcast or radio show. They could be a lecture that you recorded at school, or a sermon that you recorded from church with one of those little pocket recorder devices. It could be all kinds of things, but I do know when it says MP3 at the end of the file name, that it is audio information. So when I double click on it, sometimes it'll ask, how do you want to open this file? I'll go ahead and use that. Check the box to use this groove music, which is what comes with Windows. When I open it up, then it starts to play the music. And so, so if you run across an MP3 file, just know that that's audio of some sort. Okay, next to that, I have this picture called dogs.jpg, or usually we just say JPEG. Sometimes it's actually spelled out rather than being just JPG. Sometimes it's JPEG. But regardless, it's a picture of two dogs. And when I double click on it, it opens up in my computer's photo viewing program, which in this case is the built-in Windows photo app. And it shows me the picture of the dogs. You could see even before I double clicked it that it was a picture of dogs, because it gives you what's called a thumbnail. Basically, that's just a little picture. That the terminology comes from art, where an artist would draw what's called a thumbnail sketch of their piece before they started to create the piece. And so in this particular instance, we've got a thumbnail image of the picture of the dogs. When I double click it, there's the picture of the dogs. Great, excellent. And of course, there are a ton of different types of programs that could open either of these types of files. So you may have Apple iTunes installed on your computer, particularly if you have an iPhone or an iPad. And if you were to open up an MP3 file, it might open in one of those programs. It might open in that Groove Music that I showed you a moment ago, or any number of other programs that can handle media files. Similarly with this, a lot of different types of programs can open an image, of course. And so it may, as I said, pop up and ask you, what program you want to use, and you can just click on the program and click OK. And if you want to, you can tell it to open it to always open it in that program moving forward. Another example file that we have here is this one called govdocsstyleguide.docx. .docx is the file name extension or file extension for a Microsoft Word document. So if I double click on this, it's going to open right up and it's going to show me this Microsoft Word document. I can make changes to it. Microsoft Word, of course, is the most popular what we call word processing program around. Word processing is basically just taking is basically just writing documents and making them look the way you want them to look and so forth. So this was something I created in one of my old jobs here at the library, which was managing the government documents collection. And so I can so I could read that. I can make changes to it. Word does allow you to incorporate pictures in your documents as well. Although if you're using something that includes a lot more pictures of or that includes a lot more pictures than something like this does, excuse me, you may want to use other software like Microsoft Publisher or Canva. If I double click on this hoopla.pdf, that's going to open the this PDF file in a program. And again, it's asking me what program I want to use. This time I'm going to choose Microsoft Edge because that's already ready for me. But probably the most common program to use to open a PDF file is the Adobe Acrobat Reader. PDF files, well, PDF stands for Portable Document Format. And basically the idea behind this, if you write a document in Microsoft Word, what you're going to, you may run into problems if someone else is using a different version of Word, or if they don't have the same fonts installed on their computer that yours do, then the text might look different. Certain words might be on different lines of the document when they open it up. If they're on a mobile device, they might not even be able to open it properly. And so PDF as a format exists to solve that problem. PDF files are designed to store all of the information that your programs could possibly need to make a document look exactly right inside of the document itself. That means it takes up more space than something like a Word document, which lets essentially the receiving computer do more of the work. But it also means that your document is going to look exactly the way you planned for it to when somebody else opens it up. And that can be really, really helpful. So things like resumes or a cover letter or, marketing documents, things like that you want to look exactly right. A PDF file is the best, or, it's one of the best ways to create that. In fact, if you're in Word, you can create a PDF from a document pretty easily. What you do is go to File, Export, Create PDF/XPS document, and you click Create PDF/XPS. So if you write a document in Word and you're like, oh, I need to make sure it looks exactly like this when the other person receives it, then that's a good way to make sure that it will. You basically save a copy of it as, in that format. Okay, so other common types of files that you might run into. This one is a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, workbook, worksheet. Basically, if I double click on it, it's going to show me some spreadsheets that, again, I made back in that government documents position, listing out documents this time. Pretty much any program or any situation where you might need to make a list or keep track of numbers, things like that. Microsoft Excel is really, really handy for that. So, so it definitely is a useful thing. And so if you ever see a file whose name ends like this, .xlsx, you know that that is a Microsoft Excel workbook. By the way, if you want to know a little bit more about Excel, I am in the middle of offering my my fairly popular Excel course as well. The first two videos, I believe, are online at this point. If you head to cals.link/YouTube, then you can get there. Let me type that in. That will take you to the Cal's YouTube channel, and the Cal's YouTube channel has the recordings of Excel Part 1 and Excel Part 2. Excel Part 3 is on Monday. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to join us, and I'll be delighted to have you. Let's see here. Okay, so we've got one last file here, and then we'll talk a little bit about managing files and working with them. So the last file that's in our basic computing folder is called Staff Training Digital Services.pptx. This is a PowerPoint slideshow. And when I open it up, then you can see the presentation. Over here on the left, we've got our various slides for the presentation, and over here we can actually change the slide itself. And PowerPoint, basically, all it does is it's designed to add a visual component to what would otherwise just be you talking, more or less. And so things like lectures and presentations and technology classes. I showed you a PowerPoint slideshow earlier, actually. All of those things you can add a little visual flair to it in PowerPoint, and that way it's a little more interesting for folks, and they're more likely to pay attention. So files whose names end in .pptx, those are going to be Microsoft PowerPoint files. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about managing files. So far, we've got our folder here, we've got our files in it. What if we want to make some tweaks to our to where our files are stored, or we want to get rid of files we don't need, that sort of thing? Well, thankfully, that's pretty easy to do. And I'll show you a couple of different ways to go about it. One of those ways is to sort of drag and drop, as we say. So over here, I've got the picture of the dogs. If I wanted to move it to this test folder right here, what I'm going to do is hold down on the picture of the dogs with my mouse button, move my mouse over, and then let go of the mouse button. You'll notice before I let go of the mouse, it says move to test right there. So I know that's what I'm about to do. And there it is. The picture of the dogs is gone from here. But if I double click on the test folder, there it is inside the test folder. I could also, if I want to move it to any of these folders over here on the left-hand side, I can do that just again by dragging it over like that. If I want to move the basic computing, or if I want to move the picture back to the basic computing folder, I can click with the right mouse button on there and click cut right here. Or I can hold Control CTRL at the bottom corner of my keyboard and press, while I'm holding Control, press X, as in X-ray, on my keyboard, which actually looks like a pair of scissors. It's the keyboard shortcut for cut, and that works not just in this program, but in pretty much any program in all of Windows. So I right-clicked on this, I clicked cut. Now I'm going to click basic computing up here to go back to that folder. I'm going to click with the right mouse button again, or again, if you're on a laptop with a little touchpad, you can tap with 2 fingers to do the same thing as a right click on a traditional mouse. And I'll click paste. And there it is. The picture of the dogs is there. And if I double click on the test folder to go back into it, it's empty. So I can also, if I want another copy of the picture of the dogs, there are one in the test folder and one in this basic computing folder. I can do that a couple of different ways. One way is I can right click on it and I can click copy. And then I can double click on to get in the test folder, right click again and click paste right here. Or there's an easier way to do it. I can, if I go back to the basic computing folder, I'll click and hold with my mouse. And then again, I'll hold down that control key, CTRL at the bottom corner of my keyboard. And then when I move and keep holding down the mouse button. And when I move it over the folder, you'll notice now it says plus copy to test. When I let go of the mouse button, now there's still a copy of the picture of the dogs here. If I double click though, that's also there's also one inside the test folder. If I want to get rid of it, then I can do that too. The way it works is I can either hit delete on my keyboard, or I can right click on the picture and click delete in the menu there. Either way does the same thing. Once I do that, it'll say this folder is empty. And up here at the top, I'm going to double click on what's called the recycle bin in my desktop here. It may be in a different spot on your desktop, depending on where, depending on how your desktop is set up. So so now that I've hit delete, you'll notice that the picture of the dogs is still here. So if you just delete something from your computer without taking any other action, it's going to show up in this recycle bin. Now, eventually, the recycle bin will, I believe it'll be sort of emptied over time and stuff will go out of there, but it should stick around there at least for several weeks after you delete it. What this does, the recycle bin will keep a copy of files that you've deleted, but it's compressed a little bit. Basically, they use computer tricks to make it take up a smaller amount of space so that you're still recovering space from on your computer. But it still is taking up some space. This is really useful. Having this recycle bin that works this way is really useful for if you ever find yourself accidentally deleting a file that you wanted to keep, then you can come into the recycle bin and you can find it here. You can right click on it and you can go undo delete, or in some versions of Windows, restore. And then if I go back to the test folder, there it is again. So now let's say that I want to delete this picture and actually want to get rid of it. I don't want it taking up any space on my computer, totally done with it. And I don't want to have to worry about the recycle bin. Oh, by the way, hang on. If I have something in the recycle bin and I want to delete it permanently, the easiest way is I can either right click, or there are a couple of ways. I can right click and click empty recycle bin here, or I can go up to the top, click on recycle bin tools and go empty recycle bin. And that will get rid of it permanently. Okay, so back on the picture of the dogs, or back in the test folder here, let's say I do want to get rid of this copy of the picture of the dogs permanently. I don't want it hanging around anymore. Excuse me. What I'm going to do is I can either hold shift. So shift on my keyboard, it's next to either the question mark or the Z key. There are two different shift keys. So I can hold shift while pressing delete on my keyboard. And it'll say, are you sure you want to permanently delete this file? And it'll give me the details about it. And I can say yes. or no. I'll say no for the moment. Or I can right click and then I can hold shift while clicking delete in the menu. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this file? Yes. When I do that, it's gone from here and it doesn't show up in the recycle bin. It skips the recycle bin and just completely gets rid of the file, freeing up all of the space that that file was using previously. And so that's pretty much it. There's obviously there's plenty more stuff that we could talk about in classes like this. There are a lot of different types of things that you can learn to kind of gain more confidence with computers. One thing I will say though, that's just some which I alluded to earlier, but it's just some good general advice is again, the best way to learn about technology is not necessarily by, I certainly believe in technology classes, as you might imagine, doing this for a living. But the way that I typically learn about technology and the way that I recommend people learn about technology most often is by trying things, experimenting with it. Back when I first learned to use technology when I was a kid, things were a little bit different. Like, we've all seen movies where someone accidentally presses the wrong key on their computer and, or on somebody else's computer and deletes a bunch of important information or, deletes the project they just spent 3 days on or whatever. And while that could happen in some remote situations, generally speaking, that's not really ever been how technology worked, unless it was long before I was born. But nowadays, it's certainly not. The people who make technology nowadays know that most of the people who use their products are not technology experts. Instead, they are just regular old people who, who want to get something done. So, they're opening up Microsoft Word because they want to write a document. They're opening up PowerPoint because they have a presentation that they need to do for their boss next week, or whatever the case may be, or they're making a slideshow, a photo slideshow for their family reunion, or whatever the case may be. So in any of those situations, what you want to do is you want to, so people who make technology these days know the people who are using their technology are not experts. They're just regular people and they're trying to do what needs to be done. And so, it's important, they know it's important to build in a lot of guardrails and things like that. If you start to do something that's going to really break a lot of stuff, then you're going to get a big error message and there's going to be some red on the screen and it's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? It could cause problems. And then you get to make that choice at that point. Do I want to do this or not, basically? And so the reason I say that is I want to encourage you, if you are learning about technology in general, or if you are learning about it, how to use a specific technology tool, a device, or a program, then you're not going to break it for the most part, unless it's something extremely fancy and extremely specialized. You're not going to break it because it's made so that people won't break it accidentally. The only stipulation there I would say is you might break it if you throw it across the room or stomp on it, or if you're rough with technology, a lot of times it'll break. But if you're just using technology and trying to learn your way around it, it's not going to break for the most part, and you're going to learn a whole lot, even by stumbling down some blind alleys and not necessarily accomplishing what you intended to accomplish right away. So So that's my advice is just, try things, experiment, and you're going to learn a lot that way. But that really is pretty much it. Are there any questions before we wrap things up? All right. I don't see anything. If you are typing something, keep typing, go for it. If you think of a question afterwards that you want to ask, feel free to shoot me an email. The best email address to use is digital@cals, CALS.org, O-R-G. So that's digital@cals.org. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you got a lot out of the class, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day.